Hey everyone! We're doing something different again today on the channel. We're sticking with the normal cop watching content, but this is the first instance where I'm doing any serious editing to a video with an added narrator. After a recent cop watch, I wanted to do a short breakdown of the video and things I observed from my perspective. Sometimes there are conscious decisions that can be made over the course of an interaction with an officer, and sometimes you have to make split decisions in the moment. In this specific interaction, there's a mix of everything, so we can really explore a lot of things from the short video. To begin with, let's talk a little bit about cop watching theory and practical application. Every time I record police, firefighters, or anyone else employed by the state, I go in with a different strategy for filming. It's almost always made up on the fly depending on the situation, but there are certain phrases or behavior patterns I try to use regardless of the circumstances, and others I try to use in specific encounters. You will see examples of both in this video. Sometimes I feel the best thing to do is just stand there quietly, saying and doing as little as possible other than observing and filming. Other times it's necessary to berate a snide, disrespectful, aggressive, or just incompetent officer. But if you're going to do that, I suggest sprinkling in statistics, facts, and policy violations they are making while you film. I end up doing a large amount of cop watching by simply being outside carrying out my normal chores, and this was one of those situations. In this encounter, I was walking home from grocery shopping and was carrying multiple grocery bags. This is relevant because it affects how I comport myself around people with firearms. As you can see by the shaky footage, I began this video by starting to film as I entered the lot for these storage units. Once I arrive at the vehicle, the officer rolls down his window and asks if I need anything. I respond with a phrase I use almost 100% of the time when interacting with police.
I don't answer questions.
Oh, okay.
This simple statement informs police that not only are you not going to give them any incriminating evidence, you also know your rights, and if you can avoid it, they won't be exploiting them. Or it at least gives them the impression. If you're not being arrested or lawfully detained, you have no legal or moral obligation to converse with police. You do so under your own volition. You are allowed to film anything in public that you can see with your eyes. If you do choose to remain completely silent in a situation you feel could be sketchy, make sure the one thing you say is, "I'm invoking my right to the Fifth Amendment," to let them know legally you're going to remain silent. The only other thing you would theoretically have to say is, "I'm not speaking without a lawyer present." But if you're at that point, things have escalated. I chose to speak in this recording, and I asked,
Are you doing an investigation or are you just hanging out?
which to be honest is not usually the exact wording I use. In the past, I've always asked if they are responding to an emergency, especially if I can observe them breaking laws or policy, and are obviously not responding to anything resembling an emergency. In this situation, the officer responded no. He straight up lied that he was working on an investigation into a string of burglaries in that neighborhood. He proceeded to do this investigating by sitting in his vehicle and simultaneously staring through the windshield and gazing into another dimension via astral projection. Or something. I don't know what the fuck he was doing besides staring straight ahead. I observed that he didn't have a phone in his hands, and that his laptop was in sleep mode, if not just turned off. This is very unusual behavior for someone investigating a string of crimes, and in conjunction with him lying to my face, was the first red flag for me that his ego had taken a hit. At this point, I walk around the SUV to film not only the condition of the vehicle, the numbers and license plate for posterity and identification, but also to observe what I might be able to see inside the vehicle. Each has its own contents depending on the LEO, and you can really tell who is slovenly and who takes care of their things. Once I return to the driver's side of the vehicle is when the officer decides to get out and pretend to stretch, as a way to test my boundaries physically and mentally. Note through this whole interaction, the officer has his hand on his gun and has his body cam turned off the entire time. There are some cameras watching this location, but there are few enough to provide good evidence in the awful timeline where the LEO messes you up and you're trying to have your excessive force suit to be upheld by IA or a court of law. especially in this city since it's about impossible. At this moment, you have a split-second decision to make. Do you continue standing where you are, or do you give space to the cop? Now, I hope this isn't feeling dramatic because it's not super serious. If you're not comfortable with people being in your bubble, or you feel intimidated, or you think they're being aggressive and trying to escalate, then feel free to take some steps backward or circle to the side so you feel more comfortable and safe while filming. There is no shame in feeling or doing any of these things. In this instance, despite holding bags of groceries, I chose to move back so I didn't get assaulted by the officer in his door. I simply didn't have the mental energy for it at the time. I, however, chose not to concede any ground to the officer once he exited the vehicle and began moving around me. This was my second red flag and confirmation that this officer is a danger to citizens. Officers will sometimes try to hassle and provoke you when you're filming, or even just observing without a phone or camera. And one tactic that takes many forms is intimidation. This officer, Renzi, badge number 2695, realized he was taller and weighed more than me, so he presumably felt he could get rid of me by using multiple subtle coercion techniques. He was mistaken. First, when exiting the vehicle, he pretended to yawn and stretch to gauge my reactions and comfort given his proximity. He made sure to stand within arm's length of me to invade my personal space and try to use his frame to impose an illusionary form of authority and power on me. As mentioned before, from the time he exited the vehicle until returning to it, he had his hand on his gun approximately 90% of the time. This is another terror tactic police in the US use to control the behavior of innocent civilians. It might not be such a big deal if there were witnesses, or his body cam was on. But that's another tactic LEOs use to control dissent. To many people, the knowledge a cop is purposefully leaving their camera off in case they want to fuck you up is intimidating or plain scary. He has his hand on his gun for almost 3 minutes, which is approximately 99% of the time he and I interacted once he left the vehicle. He spends a couple of seconds just staring straight ahead, and to me, that's not only another indication he has no business in the area, but that he has no idea how he intends to interact with me. He's clueless what to do or say, but his ego won't allow him to ignore the discomfort he feels. He does this again right before getting into the vehicle and leaving, showing he's not actually there to do any work, but just to hang out and waste time. Next, he decides to burp right in my face and not apologize or excuse himself. I guess that's his way of vindication from being embarrassed by a guy holding a phone and burdened by groceries. After a couple of more seconds, I verbally point out that he has his hand resting on his gun, as if I'm a threat. I make sure to note this on camera as I do a full pan of his body to note his body posture. Right after this, he takes a really long time analyzing what I'm wearing and looking me up and down multiple times. This is something cops do often, assess you visually and make notes about it. I even have videos of officers taking out notepads and furiously scribbling down notes of my physical description to compile in their person of interest database, or whatever they do with it. Before finally tucking his tail and running away, he felt it necessary to say with a very derisive smirk, "For the record, I didn't think you were a threat," as if to diffuse the fact that I called him out. Basic psychology would dictate that, again, his ego was severely hurt, and he was trying desperately to make himself feel better by being condescending to me. Unfortunately for him, he just looked unprofessional and infantile. Finally, Officer Renzi got into his SUV, turned on the ignition without first fastening his seatbelt, which is an egregious violation of Section 4581 of the Pennsylvania Vehicle Code, and then he drove away dejected. I don't know what he was hoping to accomplish, but it seems like he didn't get out of our interaction what he wanted. The last thing I do is something I find to be fairly important, which is follow the cop until I can no longer see them and make note of which direction they are heading. This, like many other things, is done simply for posterity. Sometimes simply having that knowledge can be beneficial, so I acquire as much as I can. When you can quote police department policies, city and state laws, and statistics to cops to demonstrate that you're educated, it's somehow offensive to them, because they anticipate everyone to be just an ignorant plebeian. But our knowledge is power. The only way we can protect ourselves and our communities is through education and eternal vigilance in filming every police interaction we are able to. It is not only our legally, constitutionally protected First Amendment right to film anything we can see in public, but it is, in fact, our civil duty to do so. A very important reason to learn your laws and rights while filming is in case you actually catch an officer breaking a law or department policy. There is no greater feeling than telling an officer to their face how they are doing their job wrong, and to be right about it. If other citizens and bystanders have questions, you can explain laws and/or the detention arrest process to them, as well as why an officer might or might not be doing or saying something. And you might randomly have an incriminating piece of evidence to utilize in civil litigation against officers, or in the defense of an innocent civilian. Cop watching is undoubtedly an integral and crucial part of community defense, and it's an activity that can be taken on by literally anyone. Children, elderly, less abled, it doesn't matter. Even if you don't have a phone, just standing by and watching an officer interaction is often enough in itself to keep an LEO honest or indirectly get someone off from receiving a ticket. I have several videos where I can tell that just my walking up to a traffic stop and filming was the impetus for the driver being freed with a warning, or even preventing a car from being towed and impounded. And the good news is that you can accomplish this without a GoPro or an iPhone. Just observing with the naked eye can sometimes be enough to keep a tyrant in check. Lastly, cop watching in and of itself can be very rewarding. The greatest compensation is filming, having other citizens around you be upset at you for doing it, and the people you were filming to protect come over and thank you for what you were doing, especially if they are Black or Indigenous or people of color, because you might have literally saved their lives with just a simple act of care and mutual aid. That's why we do this. This is the first of what I hope is not the last in a series of videos breaking down how to cop watch, why we cop watch, how to stay safe doing so, and how to be informed while you do all of this. I hope you enjoyed this video, and until next time, always film the police.